views, opinions, and positions expressed on this radio program are those of the speakers, authors, or other contributors. This broadcast is intended for entertainment purposes only.
Consciousness is an amorphous and expanding entity.
Realize that you are in a cultural hypnosis.
We have been systematically put into a state of unconsciousness so that we cannot see.
I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like
What
that.
we are part of and what we are experiencing, though that is changing.
And now, here is your host for Quantum Mindfulness Radio, Joe Ayala Nunez.
Welcome back to Quantum Mindfulness Radio and the Great Awakening. I am your host, Joel Ayala Nunez, your self-proclaimed doctor of podcast, author of the book of Positive Light, Remembrance of the Heart, executive producer and founder of Real Revolution Radio. Now, for our guest for today's show on Quantum Mindfulness Radio, we will be talking with my very special guest today within this sacred space, Mr. Gary Wayne, researcher, prophecy buff, ancient mysteries historian, Christian contrarian, and the author of his rather intriguing book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Gary, please welcome to the show.
Well, so happy to be here today and really looking forward to our conversation, Joel. So thinking the audience is going to like what we're going to talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, we talked previously prior to the recording of this show, just real briefly, and I've been exposed to some of the most wonderful researchers, authors, and archaeologists concerning the giants of old. I've come across Jim Vieira, Ross Hamilton, Jason Jarrell, and just the list goes on and on. So I'm kind of wondering what all of this is leading me to. And, you know, I guess the podcast world has led me to you, Gary Wayne, and your work and how you have bridged the gap between their work and giantology, megalithomania, the Native American component, their story and how it relates to the giants of old. And with your line of work, you have basically bridged the gap to the secret societies, the mystery schools, and how you have connected that world with biblical references. How did you actually start in the beginning, and how you have been attracted to this line of work?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting path, and you know, I kind of like to say that on the way to the Colosseum, things happened. It was not going to be such a grandiose sort of project that I had imagined, that I had sketched out, because as you mentioned, I'm a prophecy buff and also a mythology and history buff, sure. And I was wanting to write my first book on prophecy. And so as I was doing the research on prophecy over the 30 years I was doing research, you know, I came across the giants in Genesis 6. So I thought what I would do is tie the giants of Genesis 6 to end-time prophecy, write a short book, and just sort of cut my skill and see whether I could get published and see what I could learn from that. But as I said, along the path, as I started to broaden out the research just from the biblical references, it turned into a 6,000-year investigation into what I call the House of Dragon, and connecting the dots over the 6,000 years of the descendants of the giants. And that led me to other mythologies, which I already knew about, that I thought, well, maybe I should perhaps link in, because I think it's kind of relative to the Genesis story and maybe give some more context. And then that led me to the other religions that I researched, and then I found that there was a whole bunch of information in on that. And that led me to, as I got particularly into the Gnostic religions, that they're significantly and intimately related to secret societies. And that just changed the whole complexion of the book. And, the notion that these secret societies go back into prehistory and to the time of the creation of the giants and to the early post-Diluvian epoch, and have been around throughout history ever since. It started to sort of sketch out more than just sort of the technical archaeological aspect of the giants and the elongated skulls, and it started to give a picture of what they were like and what they were doing and the impact that they had on prehistory, history, and what they're doing today and what they plan on doing in the future. So it changed completely and turned into a conspiracy story as to how these giants and other groups have been working together and their impact they have today. So that's kind of the short version of how I went from what I was hoping was going to be a 100 to 150 page book to an 800 page book.
So you're telling me your book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, is about an 800 page book? Seriously?
Seriously. And it was actually 1100, but I knew I couldn't get that likely published, so I edited it back to 800 pages. And but there's over 100 pages, say 120 pages of endnotes. So it's extremely well researched, and it's all there for people who would like to verify what I'm saying and go check it out and maybe dig into it a little bit deeper. Because my approach, and I'm a Christian, is to let the other religions and the secret societies and the mythologies and the history speak for themselves, and then match that up and measure it against what the Bible says. And so people can go check those sources out. And what's amazing is how, except through different lenses that they are viewing events and future events from, they are telling the same story.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, when I do my own research, and I'm not experienced researcher, I'm very novice. My actual career of choice, my trade, is essentially a nurse in psychiatry. But I'm really gravitating towards ancient archaeology. And again, like I mentioned before, it's led me towards giantology, megalithomania, and it more specifically within my niche with Atlantis and Lemuria. And we're going to be talking about that shortly as far as it relates to what we're talking about with the giants and the Nephilim and how it relates to biblical prophecy. But from everything that I've been coming across, like I mentioned before, all of these authors that I've interviewed in the past, most recent past and historically in the past 2 years, they all have their different spin of how they're taking all of this information, but they all seem to have the same path or continuation of the energy source to Lucifer and to the Nephilim, and just the origination story of how it all began. Since I mentioned this earlier before of Lemuria, how does this play in well with that end of things, with the Pacific? I know that Atlantis plays a huge part, but when you're talking about Genesis and the Garden of Eden, the dragon, the serpent, from my own research, Lemuria or Mu plays a huge part 13 to 60,000 years ago. How does that play within the whole theory from your end of things biblically, and how this relates to the giants?
Yeah, so you're talking from a biblical perspective before the flood. So everything before Noah, and back to the time of Adam, and perhaps to a time before Adam. And there's I don't get caught into the 6,000 year age of the earth. It's possible. But I also know that you can look at Genesis a couple different ways in the translations. And the first issue gets to be is that the Eden account is not identical with the day 6 account. And in fact, I have no ability to reconcile the two stories. And I don't believe the Bible contradicts itself. So when I look at the difference between Genesis 1 and day 6 and the Eden account, is that these are two different creations. So we have a gap somewhere between day 6 and day 7 there for sure that I'm quite comfortable with. But what's even more interesting is that between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, you can translate that completely differently and have a renewal of the earth that's going on, as it says in Psalms 104:30, where when God sends His Spirit, the earth is renewed, just as you have the Spirit hovering over the earth in Genesis 1:2. And some translations actually offer the alternative translation that it could be translated as the earth became form and voidless. And for me, placing an angelic rebellion before the day one creation and the earth becoming void and formless, tuhu and buhu, which is the words you really get into in terms of understanding the different translation. And I have for any Christians out there who would like some information more on the differences between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and the renewal of the earth at day one, I have an attachment that I can send people. And I get very good feedback on it. And it's a show in itself in both subjects, so it's too much to go into. So if we look at prehistory as being some different, also some possibilities that are outside the standard dogma of Christian religion, then if we start talking about different civilizations in a longer period of time, I don't have any conflicts with that. And when I look at writings from other religions, other mythologies, and what we do, we see coming sort of brought forth out of archaeology, you get an understanding that somewhere between 4 and as many as 9 religions, or not religions, but civilizations existed before the flood. And that the one that the Bible is talking about from a monotheist perspective is likely the Sumerian account. So when you talk about Atlantis, that is probably the most famous of the other civilizations and comes out of mostly the Greek accounts, although there's references to this island continent that comes out of other religions and civilizations. And that's Plato and Critias and Timaeus. You have a very similar account, but from a different civilization. So they're either talking about one civilization or at least 2 civilizations. And so when I look at the consistency of prehistory, it seems to point towards about 7 different civilizations. I know the latest realm that people are speculating on with the Game of Thrones, and it's talking about 9, which is again an antediluvian allegory. It's possible, but I'm more comfortable with the antediluvian standard of 7. And out of that, you have Mu, and you have Atlantis, and you have Asgard, you have Sumeria, you have Egypt, you have ancient Greece, and there's these civilizations that are around the world, and we see archaeological cities underwater that are unaccounted for, that I think are pointing towards these ancient civilizations. Like I think it's there's one that's off the coast of India that might be pointing towards Mu, for an example. And so when we talk about Lemuria, though, that's a more recent addition to the mythos. And that's really kind of introduced by Helen Blavatsky of Theosophy. And that is either an additional continent in the Pacific Ocean, or, as some of the mythology goes, as I understand it, it is the parent civilization that led to the 7 civilizations thereafter.
That basically brings my next question up. Some say that that's where the Garden of Eden had actually originated. And the Garden of Eden, okay, and I guess we can start off with this as well, the origination of the Nephilim and the fallen angels and so forth. I guess the deception of mankind from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden. Now, from my intuition and also from further research about serpent wisdom and how the serpent was portrayed and even perceived as something that was of a good thing in ancient times. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the serpent in itself was seen as an entity, a symbol of rejuvenation, and that was seen as a common theme in ancient times. And so I'm wondering too, when Lucifer had begun his journey deceiving mankind after falling from grace, do you think on your end, within your theories, that since the serpent was seen as a good thing from the duality of things, did he try to deceive man in that way by encompassing the serpent, the snake, in order to deceive Adam, which led to him becoming more exposed to the 7, forbidden sciences that mankind wasn't even ready to uphold at that time? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and as I mentioned early on, is that whether or not it's from the Bible or from all of the other accounts around the world, they view things from a different lens. And so that lens is monotheism and polytheism. And from a monotheist perspective, Satan is obviously not a wise god or looked upon favorably. But that's not the case in the polytheist religions. And, he is depicted as, let's say, Enki in the Sumerian mythology as a serpent. And just as Freemasonry depicts him as, the horned serpent as his flip for Enki. And this was also a symbol of wisdom in ancient ology in the different religions and mythologies around the world. And that they're also known in these serpent images around the world that say by different names and sort of looks. So you have the Nagas, for example, out of India. And they were a very wise, intelligent, providing knowledge to humans, and they had a specific look, not just as a snake, but as a cobra. And that's where the name cobra comes from, is Naga, whereas for a normal snake, in Sanskrit, it's Sarpa. So this is the same as the knuckles in the Kishamaya. These are the same as the dragon and serpent creator gods of around the world. And these are also known as seraphim angels in the Bible. And in Isaiah 6, we have seraphim that's defined, and these are messengers of God, but they're also fiery serpents. So they have 6 wings, and they're very much with the wings with a serpent face. They look like a dragon, and that's, you see sort of a coming together of this serpent and dragon mythology. And in all accounts, you have these angels providing knowledge to humankind. And to a level, as what the Freemasons will talk about, that they're going to develop the 7 sacred sciences, and to a level that is perhaps greater than what we have today, before the flood. And the reason why I say that is because in the Bible it says the end time when Jesus will come, it will be like the days of Noah. And if we are already at a technology level where we're at today, that means the technology still will be advancing, and that the antediluvian knowledge was at least what we have today and probably greater. And so you have, as I say, this commonality of the serpent imagery, just as Satan and Lucifer, or Hael, as it's translated out of Hebrew, out of Isaiah 14:12, is depicted as a serpent and a dragon, right? Because he's also seraphim, and he is the one who is leading Eve to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So again, you have different perspectives on this. This is the downfall of humankind in monotheism, because we don't have the ability to handle this knowledge. But in Gnosticism, it's the tree of gnosis, it's the tree of knowledge, and Lucifer is freeing humankind, as polytheists look at it, to become like gods. And clearly Satan is saying through the serpent in the Eden account that if you eat this fruit, you will become like gods. And this is where that evolution to God in the knowledge cults and in polytheism begins from a monotheist perspective. So again, it's how you view the knowledge. And it's not that I believe as a Christian that knowledge is bad. It's how it's applied that's important.
Right. And with you saying it just depends on the perception or what angle you're taking all this information. On our end of things, our God, Big G, the God of our Bible, we view God as the Almighty, the Creator, and so forth. But then on the side of these bloodlines, and we're going to get in more depth about what we're trying to get into, the nitty gritty, these bloodlines, which originate from these fallen angels, or the so-called impassioned angels, they continue in the same fashion on a different end or angle or perception that they think and feel that Lucifer, Satan, and other people also feel that maybe these two are separate entities or the same. I'm kind of interested in seeing how you view that particular angle, but they view Lucifer as the big G God. Yeah, just wanted to pretty much know what your angle is, but if for our listeners, if you can explain, I guess, the Luciferian agenda as far as it pertains to what we're trying to lead into with these secret societies.
Sure. So two things from what you're talking about on that. Yes. So depending on whether or not you come from polytheism or monotheism, how you're going to view Satan. And in polytheism, they have this dualist relationship where you have good and evil that is in balance, and the yin and the yang. And in that belief system, they're represented by a Satan-like character and a God-like character out of the Bible. So you might see that as yin and yang, or you might see that as Enki and Enlil. And that's probably one of the easier sort of pantheons for people to sort of get their head around. And in that Sumerian pantheon, Enlil and Enki are brothers, and they're equal, and it's part of this dualist religion of good versus evil that is always fighting and will fight eternally. And Enlil is the evil god, and Enlil is the god of the Bible in the polytheist view, and Enki is the good god who frees humankind and gives them knowledge, and it's Enlil who brings on the flood, and it's Enki who warns people like Utnapishtim and Ziusudra and the Sumerians about the flood that's coming so that they can build an ark. So complete inside out and role reversal going on there. And so we have to, when we look at what the other people believe about their gods, we need to understand that they believe that they are the children of light, they are the people of light, and we believe completely opposite, right? So it's very, very, very important to understand that. And what was the second question that you had asked me?
I actually forgot.
So did I.
I think we were so emulsified in what we were trying to head into, but I don't think it really matters at this point. It's just what we're leading into, organically talking about this conversation. Okay, so just for clarity then, Enki, as far as our end, in the realms of monotheism, Enki is actually Lucifer, and Enlil is actually
is Adonai, as they would call him in Freemasonry, are the god of the Bible. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, and the question that you were asking, I just remembered, is Lucifer two different individuals, as some people are saying, and some people are saying son of the dawn or son of Lucifer. And I understand that, and those are very, very compelling arguments. But there's three verses that, until that can be explained to me, why I would not say that they are two. And there's this kind of linked as being one. So in Isaiah 14:12, you have, how art thou fallen, O Lucifer, right, son of the morning, and you are cut down to the ground. And then in Ezekiel 28:17, it's talking about, again, who we presume to be Lucifer, although he's not mentioned as Lucifer in Ezekiel, but, God is saying, I will cast thee to the ground. Okay, now here's where it gets important. So we have this angel being cast out of heaven and down to the ground in two Old Testament verses. But in Luke 10:18, it talks about, Jesus is now talking about this subject, and he says, I beheld Satan as lightning fell from heaven. And I believe that is linking Satan, Isaiah 14, and Ezekiel 28 as all being the same individual, whether or not he's called Daystar, Lucifer, Hell, El, the devil, the serpent, the dragon, whomever. So until that's explained away to me, then I think I'll stick with it as one being. But it is a very compelling argument that people are bringing in definitions of Leviathan and the Morning Star.
Right. Now just taking us back, okay, because there's a huge question mark as to how even the Watchers, and why do they call them the Watchers? What are they exactly watching, and why had they fallen from grace? And is it just the Watchers, or a certain portion of the Watchers, that had actually fallen from grace and had followed the lead guidance of Lucifer himself? And if so, then what was the reasoning of why they were banished from heaven? And was there essentially like a revolution per se, where Lucifer, and I'm just trying to be a devil's advocate, no pun intended, like, what was he for the bulk of what humanity was all about? Hey, why not provide them with the information, the knowledge, the tree of knowledge and wisdom? Why do we have to withhold that? Maybe that's his angle of things, and why there was such a per se a revolution that happened in heaven, and the fall from grace, and again, the banishment of the angels. But then in the process of that, they had essentially tried to create relationships with the women of men, which then created these giants. And that's where we're trying to bring the connections together as to what this is all about.
Right. So that's why, as I was talking earlier about understanding the time frame before Eden, is important to understand the context of what's going on. And I think that this rebellion, and there was a full-fledged rebellion, that happens before Eden, and perhaps happens in the midst of time, and perhaps is better placed between Genesis 1:1 to 1:2, with the earth becoming void and formless because of the rebellion, and that there was a world before. And so what happens is there's more than just a few. There's more than just these Watchers. The Watchers are just a very high order, and a specific order of the seraphim. So it is, and they're a very high angel, because the seraphim are up there with cherubim and are surrounding God's throne. And so these are very, very important angels that are acting as governors and watchers of the earth. And how far back, we don't know, but again, I think it goes back into midst of time and before Genesis 1:1-1:2. So I lean towards a renewal of the earth, just because things fit so much better, and I can make a good argument from that, from the translation. And so it is a third of the angels that are rebelling as we get out of Revelation. At least it's a full-blown third by the time we get into the end time. One presumes these are the same ones that would have rebelled in the beginning, but who knows, there may have been more afterwards. We're not told whether or not more are added to it. And also in Revelations, we're told that there's 100 million angels. So if a third of them are revolting, that's 33 million. So there's a lot of these angels. And this would be more than one order of angels. We see different forms of angels, whether or not they're in forms of men, or they're cherubim, or they're seraphim, and they seem to have the ability to take different forms. But we presume there's an order and a hierarchy and different forms of angels in the angelic realm, and one would presume that there are angels from each of this realm that rebel, and they rebel with Satan or Lucifer or Hellel as the leader. And I don't believe that these beings believe that they could defeat God. They're created by God in the monotheist belief system and in my belief system, and so they know how powerful God is. You don't really hear of angels defacing God or blaspheming God. You seem to have them getting humans to do that because they know how powerful God is. They don't want to take the punishment on. They don't want to anger God. And so I believe they're looking for a different realm to live in, a different universe, however you want to call it, a different planet, and that they wanted to set up their own world that would be very, very similar to what God has created, but away and separate from God, and that was the rebellion. And so after we get the renewal of the earth, and we get the creation of day 6, and then we have the Eden account, you have Adam being created seemingly for a special commission and with life being breathed into him, because we read on that he is going to be raised, or his descendants are going to be raised above the angels in the future time, the future world. And all of a sudden now this is a real threat. Even though they've lost the rebellion, they're still hoping for this realm that I'm talking about. But what they don't want, the fallen angels, the rebellious angels, is that Adam is going to be raised above angels in the future time. And so they start on what I call Lucifer's revenge. And Eden is the first revenge. And that's where, Eve eats from the tree of good and evil, and Adam and Eve get ostracized out of the Garden of Eden. So that's the first revenge, because they're trying to ensure two things. One is that humans are going to rebel against God, and therefore not be raised. And the second thing is or just destroy them from the face of the earth. So they want totally to dominate, enslave them, and have them rebel, or make sure they're obliterated from eternity so that they can't receive their rightful inheritance. And then when you have Genesis 6 with the seraphim watchers, and we take it that there's other angels that participate other than the 200 that did it at Mount Hermon, because of all the other different types of fabulous type of beings that are created in prehistory coming out of other religions, and it's multiple times, not just one time, that, there's more than just the watchers that are mating with human females and other creatures perhaps to create these interesting beings. That's the second revenge. And they're creating these giants to create beings that look just like these serpent watchers, the seraphim, who are the Nephilim, and look just like them, and we can get into that in a few minutes if you like. And because they are created as giants and superior beings and with the immortal spirit, they become the demigods on earth, and their job is to partner with the mystical religions and the seven sacred sciences and the secret societies and the descendants of Cain to enslave humankind, to do what I was just talking about, either wipe them from the face of the earth or to enslave them and lead them in rebellion against the God. And just as we hear in the antediluvian world, the Titans actually do this. They have a rebellion against God or against the gods, depending on which version that you're going to read on that. And so this is what is going on with this rebellion, because they're trying to either justify the rebellion or save themselves from being answered to what they would call inferior human beings in the future world. But they do not, in my understanding, anticipate something very, very important. That's called the resurrection. And so when Jesus is resurrected, and as it talks about in 1 Peter, where he goes down to talk to the spirits while he's still in the grave, he is announcing to the impassioned angels and perhaps the worst of the demons that are in the abyss that your rebellion is done. That I'm going to rise tomorrow or on Sunday, and after that, humans are going to fulfill the destiny. And so what they're trying to do from that point on, because they know their fate is sealed into the lake of fire, is to again have humans rebel, as they're going to try and get us to do in the end time, to justify the rebellion and hope that God's grace will allow them to have that realm. But really they know at this point in time God's word is fulfilled. He has spoken through prophecy, and it's done. So they're really just trying to lead as many Christians astray now as they can.
Right.
And humans astray.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned Jesus a couple of times. Of course, he has a great to do with this whole story, at least in the ancient past. Now, with the agnostic realms of things, that their theology. There's many archaeologists too, and philosophers, researchers who state that the agnostic perspective is a good thing. And then, just looking at your research too as well, you state that the agnostic journey, the story, it relates more or less to the secret societies with the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, and the secret agenda that relates to this Luciferian perspective or blueprint. And so, with that said, just to clarify your end of things, how do you perceive the agnostic viewpoint? Because I believe, according to the agnostics, that they view Yeshua, Jesus Christ, as the serpent on the cross. And also, there is some references too biblically where he had mentioned, be as smart as serpents and as peaceful as doves. Is that taken out of context and misinterpreted, or is there some legitimacy towards that?
Yeah, and so I'd also say that Jesus, when it was talking about Satan falling from heaven in Luke 10, it says, "I give power unto you to tread on serpents and scorpions." And of course, scorpions is probably a reference to the crab type beings that are coming out of the abyss in the end time. So, and I think you're referring to the Gnostics as opposed to the agnostics. So, so the audience understands agnostic is, doubtful about things, not sure of. Gnostic is the religion or the knowledge of gnosis, the cult knowledge. So yeah, they have a completely different view on things as to who Jesus was, and but again, this is the religion of the secret societies, the Gnostic religion. So of course they're going to try and absorb Jesus into their belief system, and they do. They also don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. They believe he's just a mortal prophet. And so just as Hermes was, just as Zoroaster was, just as Buddha was, and on and on and on, all these enlighteners that have been sent on the way to help and show the way for humans to evolve into gods. And so they look at Jesus as just one of them, and then they use his bloodlines because they say he didn't die on the cross and he survived to have progeny. They're going to also wrap those bloodlines into these Nephilim bloodlines of the fallen race, and present that as a pedigree for the Antichrist in the end time. So when we look at the Gnostics, we need to understand that this is a polytheist religion that is umbrellaing most of the other religions from around the world. So it has the Egyptian religion, it has Zoroastrianism, it has Eastern mysticism in it, it has Kabbalism, isn't it? It's a cosmology of all of these different types of religions, which will be the end-time religion or the religion of Babel. Now, the secret societies are a creation of the seven sacred sciences that you mentioned earlier by the descendants of Cain and Enoch, who developed the seven sacred sciences, but in a way that's going to lead humans away from God, in a way that is going to discredit God for everything, for anything, and not giving him credit for creating the universe, and to use the seven sacred sciences to build megaliths and monuments to the new pantheon of God. And they continue with that today in terms of how they use science. And to house this knowledge and to develop this knowledge, they develop Enoch does, son of Cain, the sun-worshipping mysticism, which is the parent organization, which Gnosticism descends back through Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, and then back to the antediluvian epoch. And so they also create the secret societies or the mystery schools to develop certain aspects and to hold the knowledge that they're developing. And so this is where Freemasonry takes their history back to. And the Masons view that it is Enoch who creates the secret societies and their society, and he is probably their greatest patriarch. And people like Tubal-Cain are also significant patriarchs in antediluvian Masonry, just as Nimrod is the first Grand Master of Freemasonry after the flood. And he writes the first post-diluvian constitution, and he builds Babel and the Tower of Babel as an example of the rising knowledge and the new mysticism and the power that it has, because God clearly says that acting as one people with one language, there is nothing that's going to be prevented from them from doing or accomplishing, paraphrasing it, and thus the Tower of Babel and thus the dispersion. And so what Nimrod does, he partners with Hermes at Babel, because Hermes finds the two pillars of Lamech, which is, the father of Tubal-Cain and a descendant of Enoch. Again, this is of the Cain line, not of the Seth line, and their names are very, very similar in these two genealogies recorded in Genesis. And from the two pillars, Hermes locates the 9 vaults of Enoch's knowledge. That's 36,525 books of the 7 sacred sciences and religions that's supposedly buried under the pyramids, and he brings that back to Nimrod, and they start everything anew with the new rebellion. That's why the languages are dispersed at Babel. And so when we look at the Gnostic perspective on things, they are going to spin everything differently, right, from their perspective and their agenda. And they will look at the flood as an evil thing done by the evil God of the Bible, whom they like to call Adonai. And they look at Sodom and Gomorrah not as places of evil. They look at Sodom and Gomorrah as cities of light, and from some of the Gnostic Gospels, that's where the second incursion would have started in terms of more impassioned angels copulating with human females and creating more giants. And so you have, again, this total inside-out perspective, and there are two competing views. One is for that dualistic perspective where there is no God that is superior than the other God in this good versus evil, right? You have this pantheon of gods, whereas in the monotheist belief system, you have an omnipotent God who is greater than all the other so-called gods because they're angels whom he created. So the only way that they're going to lead people away is they have to discredit Jesus, which is where we're leading to in terms of the serpent imagery that comes out of applying that to Jesus and using allegory from the Bible to make their case, just as they make the case for the serpent seed through allegory out of the Eden account in 3:15 out of Genesis. So this is not unusual, and also understand that when we look at Gnostic Gospels, they'll look at this demurrage or Ayaldabaoth, and they'll equate this evil god who has a serpent-like look and depicted with this lion's head as being the evil god and the god of the Bible, and the one who says there's none beside me. So these are two poles apart ideologies that are going to view things completely different and will right through to the end.
And again, I guess it's all about perspective, whether it's one end or the other. But it seems to be from your end of things, and from what I'm observing, it's just the twisting of truths, along the way, along the timeline historically,
sure,
on whether it's from the Quran or from the Holy Bible, or even many other biblical, other religious or spiritual biblical texts, the Bhagavad Gita, I'm sure. But yeah, it's like, how do you know which is truth? I guess the only way would be to gravitate
the fruit.
Towards
the fruit.
Right? There you go, right? So,
I was just going to say that, and of course they view not only the angels of the rebellion as the good gods, because they provide this knowledge, and much of it is illicit knowledge from heaven, along with the seven sacred sciences that is developed. But it's how they develop that knowledge. And they also look at the giants as the divine rulers, right? They are the God's representative on earth. And so they link back to the gods, and that's why the royal dynasties descend from these giants. And these were known as, the demigods of the ancient civilizations. And these are the same group of gods that most, again, religions and mythologies will say they started out ruling judiciously, but then I guess the human side, as it's recalled in these other versions, take over and they turn into evil and they rebel against the gods, which is why the flood comes. And then there's a restart after the flood again, where the giants again show up and again usurp the kingships where our modern dynasties and the modern bloodlines come from.
Okay. I think this is a good spot to conclude this first segment of the show, because I really want to get into the relevance, the significance of what the Nephilim are all about. There seems to be a very important agenda that Lucifer feels is the reason why we have to continue that bloodline into what we're going to be talking about in the second half of the show. But with only less than 2 minutes left on the first segment, Gary, can you provide our listeners with any of your contact information?
Yes, you can contact me through my website, Genesis6conspiracy.com, Genesis6conspiracy with the number 6.com. You can email me with any comments or questions that you may have, and if you do have a question, I will get back to you, or you can follow me on Facebook under Gary Wayne. I also have two Gary Wayne or two Genesis 6 conspiracy pages that I also post on, and I'm also working with the Giantology page right now as well. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Gary Wayne 63 at Gary Wayne 63.
And there you have it, our guest for today's show, Mr. Gary Wayne, ancient mysteries expert, biblical historian, and researcher, and the author of his eye-opening book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. See you soon for this next segment, the second segment of our show on Quantum Mindfulness Radio.
Whether it's coming from the world of entertainment, integrative medicine, quantum theory, conspiracy fact, ancient archaeology, sacred geometry, financial trends, or perhaps even from the very world of self-help and motivational speaking, Real Revolution Radio possesses the information you need. Listen today to our daily inspiring lineup of podcast radio talk shows, only on realrevolutionradio.com.
Today to the Marine Show, where we will introduce you to the world of alternative remedies. Join Marine Pisani as she hosts discussions with leading experts in the fields of hypnotherapy, acupuncture, yoga, Ayurveda, EFT, chronic healing, integrative medicine, and so much more. Marine will also brave topics that many consider taboo. Yes, taboo talk. Tune in today to the Marine Show, heard on popular social media and now on Smart TV.
It's a Mindfulness Radio production, only on realrevolutionradio.com.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cleveland, we now have liftoff to a higher level of consciousness. Tune in to realrevolutionradio.com, the #1 source for independent music and inspirational podcast radio. Awaken, evolve, inspire, and join the evolution only on realrevolutionradio.com.
You're listening to realrevolutionradio.com. There's hope as long as you're alive.
Welcome back, dear listeners, to the second half of our show on Quantum Mindfulness Radio. And now, I have with me, returning back to the second half of the show, is Gary Wayne, where we will be continuing our intriguing and awe-inspiring conversation about the Nephilim, the Watchers, the Giants, and then their connection to the mystery schools, or at least the continuation thereof, the secret societies, and then the ancient bloodlines of the highly secretive cabal, the elite. And Gary is the author of his book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Gary, please welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me back, and looking forward to continuing our conversation.
Now, Gary, I'm telling you, this show, this conversation with you kind of wraps up together from all of my other previous conversations with Ross Hamilton, and he's fairly an expert on the giantology, the connection with the giants, the red-headed giants connected with the First Nations people, and the corruption endorsed through by the Smithsonian. Jason Drell is another continuation of some of the researchers who has followed by faith the research within the giantology with the First Nations, with most recently with Jim Vieira. He has a book called Giants on Record. There's many other individuals I would like to invite to as well, but I think my conversation with you really encapsulates and brings everything together, the historical timeline, again, the secret societies, the biblical references, and along with other ancient sources, which gravitate towards the ancient civilizations of Lemuria, with Atlantis, and this has just been a wonderful experience for me. So how this second segment is going to be gravitating towards is the intention of why the Nephilim are so important to the Luciferian agenda. Now, in this revolution of sorts of Lucifer and the fallen ones, what is the importance of the Nephilim in order to retract that population of a higher, demigod angels to go through a gateway into the earthly plane in order to transmutate into these giants? And correct me if I'm wrong, these giants are essentially the Nephilim, right?
Yes, the giants are the Nephilim, and so if you take the word giant that comes up in the King James Bible, and more of the other English translations will actually use the word Nephilim as opposed to giant. But giant goes back to the word Nephil. I am means one, and Nephil goes back to basically fall or fallen ones. And so these also were known as, it comes out of Hebrew as Nephilim, as a race of giants. So, and what's interesting about that is, and just before I come back to your question, is that out of mythology, whether or not it's Atlantean mythology or Egyptian mythology or Kishimaya or the giants that escape out of Tartarus and Scythia and the Tuatha De Danann, is you have two colors of hair and two colors of eyes with generally white skin, which connects to what they're finding in North American giants and with those Peruvian skulls and the elongated skulls. So typically you have blonde hair and blue eyes, and you have red hair and hazel eyes and pale white skin. So it's not surprising that you find these skulls that have these, and these skeletons that would have had red hair. So that's very, very consistent with what is told around the world about these giants. Now, what's important about these giants to the secret societies and the mystical religions is not only do they have a long-term play going on with this, and it's all about who they are, but it's also part of their infrastructure. So in the past, you are going to have a king, which is the Nephilim, and then you're going to have the priesthood and the religion that partners with it, and generally it's that polytheist religion, whether it's Rome or it's Babel or it's Nimrod or it's Egyptian, and the priests are generally depicted as magi or wise men or wizards, as you see the imagery come down throughout time, and we just don't recognize them as being that ancient religion that I've been talking about. Now, the bloodlines are very, very important, and they've intermarried the bloodlines all the way through history to keep those bloodlines pure, because that's the genealogy that takes them back to the Nephilim and back to the gods and gives them the divine right to rule that they like to say that they have, because they are the gods' representative as the royal families on earth. And so the secret societies today are governed by these royal bloodlines. Not all of them are on the thrones today. There are many very pure bloodlines that are in the backgrounds, but they still control the secret societies who they control. And they're utilizing the secret societies to bring about the end time, or the new Atlantis, which is why it's important to understand Atlantean mythology. And they're bringing about this end time to bring about this new Atlantis that they would call the New Age, or the New Age of Aquarius and the false millennium that they're wanting to present, or the Fourth Reich, as some people would like to call it. And if we go to Daniel 2:43, we get a hint of what they're trying to do here. So in Daniel 2, you have these two-footed or 10-toed kings, as the allegory goes in Daniel, but 10 kings that are like iron and clay, and iron and clay don't mix. And what's interesting about that is it says that the kings descending from the Metal Empires are going to mingle with the seed of men. So you have this statue where you have the Babylon Empire of gold, and then you have the Persian Empire, and then you have the Greek Empire, and then you have the Roman Empire, which is the iron one. They're all different metals, gold, silver, bronze. And then you have the Iron Empire rising up with these 10 toes, and they're going to intermingle with the seed of men. So this new Atlantean Empire of 10, which is also stated in Revelation, is going to be partly of human descent, of rulers, and partly of the descendants of the Metal Empires or of the royal bloodlines, translated of the giants. And so you're going to have a 10 block of nation, or 10 groups of nations, or 10 spheres of influence being set up around the world to run the government. They will send a representative of these leaders to run the world government. And the Club of Rome, which answers to the Rosicrucians, which is one of the higher levels of secret societies that are reporting to the purebloods, and about half the Rosicrucian, at least the upper half, are purebloods that are part of the Rosicrucians. They set up the Club of Rome to focus on recreating the new Atlantis and setting the world up into these 10 groups of nations. And the new Atlantis comes from a very famous Rosicrucian named Francis Bacon, who's the inspirational founder to the Royal Society. And if people were listening in the first part of the show, that the sciences are being developed to lead people away from God, to not give God credit for anything, to defame God, and to glorify the great architect of the universe, or Satan, or Lucifer, whatever you want to call him, in the pantheon of gods. Okay, so he's the inspirational founder for the Royal Society, which is founded in about 1660 to 1662, and he writes a book called The New Atlantis, where a religion is going to be a bridge to the sciences for the end time in this new Atlantis, as he's imagining it, that comes out of, Mystery School of Solomon of 6 days. And so this Atlantean allegory is very important to understand, because if you go back to Crataeus and Timaeus from Plato and Atlantis, you find out that it's more than just an island continent. It actually had 10 kings, 10 king empire. So Poseidon copulates with Clymene, who is a human female, and produces 10 Titan Nephilim kings who rule this empire. And they're trying to war and take over the world to have this world empire. And they were considered the helm of world government, at least according to the Atlantean mythology, but they're defeated before they can accomplish this by the Athenians, as Plato talks about. But it's the allegory that's important. So just as they had in the prehistory this Atlantean golden age, this age of Aquarius, the first time, Zep Tepi, whatever you want to call it, that's ruled over by these Nephilim, and they want to set that up in the end time. And of course, that's what prophecy is telling us through Daniel and Revelation.
Now, you mentioned Francis Bacon, and immediately when you had mentioned his name, I remember a conversation from another broadcast, not mine per se, but from many other podcasts, that Francis Bacon, and tell me your side of things, whether this is true or not. Is he the well-renowned William Shakespeare?
Well, many people believe that, and I think I think there's a very, very good case to make for that. Certainly, Bacon had arranged for a group of writers, and he was a writer, a very famous writer of his time, and that he was hiring, I guess, writers of the theater. Not sure what the exact term of that is off the top of my head, to develop the English language, and which also connects into the development of the English Bible, which was a manifestation of the new modern English language that they were trying to develop. Now, Shakespeare is writing in distinctly an Oxford style, has an understanding of Ovid's, all of the classics, different languages, all sorts of Rosicrucian and Illuminati, symbology, fairy mythology, and on and on and on and on, and he doesn't have a formal education. And so what people believe is that Francis Bacon, therefore, is Shakespeare, and used a pseudonym to produce his plays that he didn't want to have, be shown as being written by him, because he's the second most powerful person in England, in both Queen Elizabeth's court and then in King James Stuart court. So he's doing it, I guess, to keep that sort of anonymity, as sort of the legend goes. There's no real proof of it, but the people that think that Shakespeare wrote these plays, it's a pretty dubious story in terms of how he was able to do it without having the right education to be able to present that sort of knowledge. I suppose it's possible. If it's not Bacon, it's probably somebody else, but I think Bacon's probably the rightful candidate on that.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing I forgot is he created this society of these writers of spear shakers, which goes back to Apollo and Athena, right? Of these writers. That's what they called it. So it's just, Shakespeare is just a play on the word of the society of writers that he created. Sorry, I forgot about that.
so really, just the Shakespeare itself is kind of like a stage name for the most part. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and you know, the Globe Theater was like considered a Rosicrucian theater. I mean, it was all about Rosicrucian belief system. And the reason why that is because not only were they a high-level secret society, and not only was Francis Bacon talking about this religion that was going to bridge and be joining religion, and it's polytheist religion and science in the end time, Rosicrucian is the one that is housing the Gnostic religion that then creates Theosophy to be this bridge to bring science and religion together.
Okay. Now it's just I'm sorry if I jump back and forth with a lot of this ancient history and other things of my own experiences, but just to recap and to review of what we've talked about, you know, to where, you know, I want to lead to my next questions. The Nephilim, okay, the importance of the Nephilim according to Lucifer. The importance of that is to for the continuation of the bloodline. From the Watchers, the fallen angels, and of course, in order to do so, you would have to have the bridge in order to make that happen, and to corrupt humanity, which is humanity is a creation of God, and in order to defy God, to degrade what God is all about, and of course, from what they know, they cannot destroy God. God is just too powerful. But I guess to underminingly passive aggressively, I guess, for my end of things as a psychiatry nurse, to basically defy God and the revolution of things under the guise of Lucifer is to corrupt humanity, to enslave humanity. And to do so, I mean, I guess the very first step would be to corrupt Adam by providing him with these 7 forbidden sciences, which would lead consciousness astray, and then to mate with the women of man, and then to create the continuation of the Nephilim and these giants, and then the main agenda, you know, from what my observations tell me, is that within the Nephilim, the Antichrist will come. And if you could tell me if I'm on the right track with things, and whether this Antichrist, is this one thing that they feel will come in another form, which will be as equal as God, or something that will just stir up the pot even more?
Well, they have their own trinity. So everything that you have in polytheism is trying to counterfeit what God has done, just as the immortal spirit was called a counterfeit spirit. They're trying to create a counterfeit realm and counterfeit gods, or counterfeit angels is what really they're offering. So everything's a counterfeit. So Antichrist is a counterfeit Messiah. He's a false Messiah. And so they're going to create this false Messiah by having a pedigree that goes back to the immortal spirit and back to the Nephilim and back to the seraphim angels, and with the divine right to rule. And so everything that they're going to do is going to be that counterfeit. So to answer your question with that as a backdrop, they look at, let's say, the Egyptian pantheon, this comes out of Freemasonry, as their trinity would be Osiris, Isis, and Horus the sun, with Osiris being Lucifer and Horus being Antichrist. And so that's their trinity, right? And so this Antichrist is going to still worship Lucifer as his father, right? Just as Jesus looks at God as his father.
Right.
And so, okay, and just as we have the Holy Spirit in our trinity, and I know Trinity might be a bad word for some Christians, but in the sort of the 3 sets that come out of the Godhood set, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, they have Isis, which is the female aspect, or Sophia of the Gnostic religions. So, having laid all of that, and you have Antichrist, who will take control of the world as the false Messiah, or as the replacement Messiah, or as the opposite of Christ. And he will worship his God, and he will make that God, Lucifer, known after he is crowned King of the world and Messiah in the temple at the 3.5 point of the midpoint of the last 7 years of the end time. So did I answer that clear enough for you, Joel?
Absolutely. And that leads to my next question. Just out of curiosity, and I'm not sure if you kind of dip into this thought, but just from observation on my end of things, I was originally born into a Catholic type of raising up of things, and my experiences as a Catholic contradicted, I guess, my beliefs, and I questioned a lot about Catholicism, and regardless, I just kind of abstained from it after so many years. But then, in revisiting a lot of the ceremonies and how everything is in Latin, and you kind of often wondered, what are they talking about in Latin, and why is it in Latin, and why many people don't even know what much of the Latin framework is as far as its grammar and its interpretation. If you would think you had a particular religious structure or blueprint, and you wanted clarity of thought, that you would probably bring it to a language which is not as archaic. And so I believe it was 2014, 2015, and I was seeing what the Pope was basically putting out there on blast, and he had actually made it a significant importance to have it broadcasted in many platforms so it could be seen globally. And it was surprising to see in much of the language, the rhetoric, that Lucifer, what was pronounced many times, and I often wondered, okay, is that actually Lucifer that is being said? And then when I saw the interpretation and how it integrated with the intention of what that ceremony was about, I started to think, okay, what's going on here? I questioned the intention, why. Okay, it's Easter. I mean, we're talking about Jesus, Christ, and so forth, Yeshua, but we're talking about Lucifer, and what is your spin on things as far as what the agenda is Vatican-wise? Of course, its relationship to Rome, the Jesuits, and how it pertains to its continuation of this bloodline with the secret societies and the main agenda with the Luciferian agenda.
Big question. There are lots of things going on, and Pope Francis does use a lot of what I like to call double entendres, and it's very, very cryptic in terms of you can interpret what he's talking about two different ways, and my conclusion is growing that it's for a reason. And so if he's talking about Lucifer, he's talking about morning star, and Lucifer is basically the Latin word for Venus or for morning star. And that's why when you see in other translations other than the King James, you don't see Lucifer in there, you see day star or morning star. And just as Jesus is referenced in relationship to morning star, but not being the morning star, he conflates that, and it's very, very disturbing what he's doing in that sort of manner. And the Jesuits were set up in about the 1500s, and the Jesuits interpret the Bible through the 7 sacred sciences, and so it's this Gnostic sort of mystical society, initiatory society, monastic society within Catholicism that was set up after the fall of the Templars, which were operating sort of at the virtual edge and outer edge of Catholicism. That's why you saw Jesuits as part of the priesthoods traveling to the New World. And so the Templars were formed by Gnostic monastic orders within Catholicism, whether it's the Cistercian or the Benedictines or the Augustines. They were working in partnership with the Bloodlines to develop this organization within Catholicism. But once it's destroyed, they have to set up all of these other societies, Jesuits just being one, to do their will within the church, to bring it down, to convert it to polytheism, and to control the education, just as the Royal Society is created by Freemasons and Rosicrucians to control education outside of the realm of Catholicism. Just as they also created the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and the Rothschilds, all to do different aspects of what the Templars were doing. Now, having said all of that, understand that for the first time we have a Jesuit as a leader of the Vatican. And what's important about that is to watch what Francis is doing is because, as I mentioned earlier, that everything is a counterfeit. So there's a false prophet that's coming, right? And this false prophet will make the way for Antichrist. I'm not saying Francis is the false prophet. I'm not saying Francis is Antichrist. All I'm saying is he seems to be working in that direction to bring that about. And bringing that together is that we understand that the Babel religion of the end time has two horns like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon, and dragon is the imagery of the Nephilim and of serpent and of Satan, and the lamb is an imagery of God. So we have the superficial sort of Christian religion that is totally corrupted by polytheism that will spread out and umbrella all the other religions of the world under this Babel religion of the end time. Now, we have what's important to understand is there is, and you might be aware of, Malachi, who was a Irish priest who made a prediction of all of the popes that would come from about the 1200s on to the end, and there's two schools of thought on this. One is we're either on the last pope or there's another one to come. But he would give a description that you would be able to identify these popes, and that most of them have been verified. Now, I understand this is not canon, but it's certainly interesting, and certainly in the times that we're in to talk about. And so this pope, if you buy into the fact that this is the last pope by the numbers, is supposed to be the black pope and the anti-pope. Now, anti-pope as in antichrist, if you take that back to Greek, that means replacement pope or opposite pope. So just as antichrist is going to try and replace Jesus, false prophet and the anti-pope is a replacement pope who has actually replaced Benedict because he's still alive. So he's a replacement pope. And I can only think of maybe one other example. It would be Pope Gregory in about 1600, where you had two popes alive at one time. And the leader of the Jesuits is called the Black Pope, and the leader of the Vatican is called the White Pope. So the first time we have a Black Pope leading the church. And again, the description for this last pope, this anti-pope, was a black pope, and everybody was looking for somebody out of Africa or a black-skinned person, not necessarily a Jesuit. And now you have Francis, who is working on environmental things on a global level, trying to unite religions around the world, working with leaders, working with the United Nations, and becoming increasingly more political and global as he's changing doctrine and saying some very, very strange things. And it looks like he is preparing the church for the false prophet and the beginning of the Babel religion that will go home to what they believe and the Gnostics believe is the true religion of polytheism.
And just an observation from just some YouTube videos where people have dipped into the rhetoric of many of the Pope ceremonies. There is the mention of polytheism and the importance of that throughout the world. I guess there's a main movement within the Vatican behind the scenes of like what you mentioned, the induction of a polytheistic type of spirituality to bring together the world, I guess.
Yes, and to say that everybody worships the same God, they just call him by a different name. That's what the Gnostics believe.
Right. Right. Now just backtracking too as well. I think you had mentioned the Frill Society too, as far as, and from what I know about that, wasn't that a secretive society that originated from Hitler's reign? I believe back in World War II.
Which society was that you're talking about?
I think it's called the Frill Society. And
the Brill?
The Brill, right.
Yeah, that's actually something that the Nazis picked up. It's actually a Rosicrucian belief. Now, the Nazis had a lot of secret societies, and they're created from theosophy and the merge and the formation of secret societies, whether it's the German Orden or the Thule Society or the Frill Society, and there's several of them that are brewing this takeover to, I guess, sort of be, I would call it an archetype of the end time. But again, that's a little bit different rabbit hole than what you're asking. So to stay on topic, the Frill is a Rosicrucian belief that the Nazis took up, that it is something in the blood, that if you could actually re-engineer it back, you could actually recreate the giants, because they believe that there's something in the blood and the bloodlines of the descendants of giants that recreate the giants and the demigods, which they're trying to do, which is what they're really trying to offer, is godhood in the physical realm. And so it's a very, very important ideology that was picked up by the Nazis. And so the Frill is as the Nazis believe, goes back to a race of giants, or the Aryans, who I was talking about in the first part of the show, and that's the blonde-haired, blue-eyed aspect of these Nephilim descendants. And Thule is their equivalent in this Volkish ideology that they've overlaid it. That's the German ideology, or the German sort of slant and culture over it is Thule. And that was one of the societies that I'd mentioned as one of the key organizations to bring about the Nazi organization. So they believe in the antediluvian world of Thule, where blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans ruled, and they eventually sort of devolved, but they could reinvent through bloodlines and genetics this Nephilim race again. Of course, that they would call a little differently coming out of Nazi ideology. They called it the new man concept, right? But the new man concept is the Nephilim concept. And anything that you have to do with trying to create a superhero or an improved human is just a different variation on the Nephilim concept. So did I hit on the points that you were looking for there, Joel?
Oh, yeah. Because and again, I had no structure to this conversation at all. But I can see how, I guess spiritually or synchronistically, how this is shaping to be different from your other conversations. And I love it too. I love the direction of it. So my next question, and usually when I kind of lead to this, or when I kind of, on the verge of asking the questions, like something happens to the recording, or my special guest gets disconnected, or the person's about to say it, and they're like a huge pause, and they're kind of hesitant on whether to reveal it or not. Okay, so here's my question: does any of all this? Okay, is there a relationship with the Nephilim, with the bloodlines, with Lemuria, the old Atlantis, the new Atlantis, the Luciferian Agenda? Is there a relationship? And again, this kind of ties to what Hitler was really delving deeper into, not only with the Brill Society and the Thule, and from what he knew from his own knowledge from Rosicrucianism. Does any of this have any connection to Agartha with Middle Earth?
Well, Middle Earth is part of the Asgard creation story, right? So when you have the defeat of the Leviathan like creature in the Asgard mythology, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it's a bit of a tongue twister. So, but anyways, there's a Leviathan type creature that is in the Asgard mythology. That's where Middle Earth is created. We have separation of the waters to create sky and earth, as in the Bible, as in all other polytheist religions, whether it's Tiamat or Lotan or any other ones, and whether or not it is Marduk or any other god characters that are crushing this Leviathan-like character to create Middle Earth. So this is again part of that whole sort of ideology that is part of this Nephilim bloodline, right? And it all goes back to dragons and serpents, whether it's right from the original rebellion, as they like to say, is what happened at creation with the separation of the waters, or the angelic rebellion, and that this Frill bloodline is what is important to present the false Messiah, that he has to have the pedigree of these bloodlines. And they call that not only Frill, but they also call that the gene of Isis. And if you remember earlier, I was talking about the Egyptian trinity of Isis and Osiris and Horus. And the gene of Isis is this genetic marker, whether it's something in the blood or it's a gene that produces this particular blood, that takes them back to the gods, right? And you would also hear this as in the secret societies and some of the cryptic speeches that they might make, like certainly both Bushes were talking about. They called it the 1,000 points of light. And this is the spark of the divine, as it's also called, that it's only those people that are going to be welcome in this new age of Aquarius. For translation, the descendants, the offspring, and the genetic offspring of these giants, who will be led by the purebloods. So keeping track of these genealogies throughout time is going to be very, very, very important. And as I mentioned in Daniel, these are the ones that are going to be pulling the strings in the world government, descend from the dynasties coming out of history. And then you have Antichrist, who will present his pedigree that links all of the major bloodlines from around the world that descend from giants as his credentials as the Messiah.
Okay, just to clarify too, since in the, I won't say the superficial mediums of things, but on the surface, these giants, they're in the form of these bloodlines and the shape of people within these secret societies that apparently rule the world through the corporations, the banking cartels, and pretty much many of the things behind the scenes. But is there also, and I think you mentioned it earlier slightly, that there's also a movement to getting the DNA of the actual, the monstrosity of these giants back into the forefront of science and military, in which they are creating this super soldier program. And tell me if I'm wrong too, but I'm not sure if I'm getting this information from speculation or from false pretense. But from what I've heard, since I work in the VA medical system as a psychiatry nurse, I work with a lot of the veterans, old and young, and many of the young also say that they've heard of, I believe, a giant or giants of Kandahar back in, I think, Afghanistan, and they did not know how to think of that. They heard rumors of it. As far as the actual soldiers who heard of these giants, I believe that there's no way to even actually get a hold of these guys in particular. And my other question is this: if that's the case, fine. But does it also encourage and support of all of that the reason why we went into Afghanistan, why we had gone into Iraq, why we're in Syria, and all of the happenings that are happening right now in relationship to ancient old bloodlines and our historical connection to the Nephilim?
Yeah, I mean that's those are some good speculative connecting the dots. The name of that Leviathan I was thinking of is Midgardamar, which is where Middle Earth comes from. So back to your question now. There's always this ongoing transhumanism aspect. Right.
Right. I love it.
In all sorts of different forms, right? And so they're trying to create the new Nephilim, whether it's through DNA manipulation, through bloodlines, through geneticism, and all sorts of, through bionic parts. And I'm sure they're looking at how do you create the Nephilim of old again, and whether or not there's giants that are still around today, possible. And I certainly listened to that interview from the pilot in the Afghanistan scenario, and it was very compelling and very plausible story, and the details were fairly consistent with what you would expect in terms of their dexterity, in terms of the hair color, in terms of the smell, in terms of the size, and very, very similar to what I wrote in my book in terms of the size of these beings, and that they're associated with caves and things like that. And then you have all of these Nephilim in stasis, and then you have creating of these super warriors for the army. There's so many different speculations out there. It's hard to know what's misinformation and what isn't misinformation. But the common trend is look at the trend. And the trend is to create new Nephilim, the new man, somehow, some way, right? And I think because the end time are going to be like the days of Noah, we're going to see an impact of Nephilim again. It's just a matter of how. Is it through the descendants of the Nephilim, through the bloodlines? Is it through angels coming out of the abyss that are going to copulate and create new Nephilim, or more fallen angels are going to rebel that aren't in the abyss to create the Nephilim? Or are we going to create other forms of Nephilim through DNA and other aspects? Hard to know. But directionally, we are moving in that direction. There's no doubt about it. And they need to be able to offer people of the earth this God on earth, or this God in the physical aspect of reality, as opposed to the other dimensions in the spirit realm, because to rebel against the God of the universe, as they're going to portray him as equal to Lucifer, as in fighting in Star Wars, this good versus evil, which is an allegory of what they're trying to do, they're going to have to offer godhood to the people, right? To take the mark, to swear the loyalty. Otherwise, why would you do it?
And this is just an amazing conversation, because in the back of my head, been formulating, and this is where a few weeks back I've had a conversation with Robert Stanley, and also with Jolene Jojo Seebacher. She's going to be having a special on the History Channel concerning the Montauk Project and just the mind manipulation that's going on throughout the world, and how it relates, to this connection with the Nephilim of the Luciferian Agenda. And just backtracking from a year or so of my conversation with Ross Hamilton and Jason Jarrell, they made mention of the manipulation in human DNA in connection with the Giants, and how that can be where they are integrating or reintegrating the DNA, the manifestation of that consciousness back into form in these times. And that's where it led me to the later conversations with Albert Stanley. I got to tell you, I started to see a transmigration or an evolution of the conversations between other podcasters, other alternative type of broadcast, where many people, such as yourself, who have tapped into the next stages of what is yet to come, and those conversations have led to this transhumanistic agenda. Now, I know everybody knows about the Terminator movie series and such and so forth, and it seemed so outlandish back in the 80s to even realize that from even happening. Who's to say that such movies were just implanted into our own psyche in preparation of what is yet to come 30, 40, 50, 60 years later? And now these conversations that we have today, you start to really think like, okay, that doesn't seem too far off from what, if there is an illusion, if there is a deception that is going to be taking place, I mean, something like this would really blindside you to a point where, wow, I wasn't even expecting that. And that's what Lucifer is all about. He is the father or forefront of lies and deception. Mm-hmm. And this agenda,
it will deceive the elect if that were possible.
Right. Right. And for even the people who are very good at anticipating and predicting futures or potential timelines of what can happen in this timeline, most of them didn't have any particular idea that this would be the case. And so, and that's what I think where we can conclude with this conversation, this transhumanistic agenda. And I'm going to lay out the things that I've acquired along the way for my own research. Are we strong upon the path of what is yet to come? And so, I've forgot the name of that individual. His name is Geordie Rose, who is one of the, I'm not sure if he's one of the inventors of D-Wave, which is kind of like a quantum computer type of technology, but it's pretty much in parallel with CERN, huge facility out there in Switzerland. I believe it's in Switzerland. And the speculation and from the research from that is that there's gateways being opened. And with the D-Wave, which is a kind of like a quantum computer type of thing. And you would think that, quantum computers, that's a wonderful thing. It's another advance in technology and in science where it could take computer technology to the next level. But then there's a darker side of that Geordie Rose, from one of his presentations, I'm not sure if it was a TEDx talk, but I think it was more or less from a seminar, from a group of scientists that were involved. And he was talking about possibly opening these gateways to other dimensions, where the intention was to create a question and then to bring that question to the next dimension or whatever focus of dimension and to retrieve an answer. And from that in itself, you're opening a gate or Stargate, but in the midst of opening that Stargate, what comes out of there? So with that being said, as it relates to Robert Stanley, and I know I'm kind of like all over the place, my conversation with him, it was like, is there something on the other side from another dimension that they're trying to retract and to bring into this dimension, which coincides with the artificial intelligence, the transmigration of this transhumanistic agenda, which kind of goes hand in hand with the Vatican, the Jesuit, the continuation of the bloodlines as it relates to the blueprint or agenda from the secret societies. What can you gravitate from that?
Yeah, again, a very, very large subject there. So let me just start with the quantum computer aspect and move forward and connect some dots in here. So I think with the quantum computer, it changes everything in terms of how fast technology and information and things can develop. So that what we might have thought might take 50 or 100 years might take 4 or 5 or less. So anything on a timeline as more quantum computing happens changes everything. So there's transhumanism as to what they can do with artificial intelligence and technology and DNA manipulation and bionic parts and whatever you want to call it, has the ability to fast track in a hurry. And of course, quantum computers are used in association with quantum physics, where things can be in one location at the same time, more than one location. And this leads you into the idea of different dimensions. And if you're going to utilize, if you're looking to intersect or build a gateway or deal in other dimensions, you're going to need quantum computing because it's built on that sort of premise. So, and I understand there's like 7 of these computers in the world, and they can hold now all the information of the universe in these quantum computers 30 times over. So it has a power that we can't understand, and it can, what would take a supercomputer 500 years to calculate, a quantum computer, and my information is a few years old, so it's developing at, probably even faster, would only take seconds. So 500 years from a supercomputer, which we thought was really powerful, to a quantum computer into seconds. And if you're looking to get into dimensions, then are they talking about trying to open the abyss, where the impassioned angels were walked into, right?
Absolutely.
Just as I talked about serpents and scorpions and these scorpion demons coming out with the impassioned angels out of the abyss. And so if you go back to Babel that I talked about in the past, and that they were building something, and they may have been trying to build a Stargate there as well, because if you take Babel away from the Hebrew meaning, which means confusion of languages, and follow Nimrod as he starts the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, and the Akkadians, and take the Akkadian translation of Babel, which is Bab-El, Bab as in gateway, and El as in gods. Were they trying to build a gateway to the gods and bring these angels back out of the abyss that were just recently imprisoned? Who knows? But here's another connection to it. CERN, just the name CERN, and you may not be aware of this, or maybe you are, I don't know, but CERN is not just a name that was haphazardly picked for this project in Switzerland. CERN is actually a god of the Druids. It's actually known as Cernunnos, and he's a Pan-like god character. And the name is actually shortened to actually CERN, C-E-R-N, as Etruscan god. Again, very much the Pan god out of Greek mythology. So it was a horn god, it was a fertility god, it was a god of the forest, and all sorts of horrible other connotations I won't go into today. And back in the mythology part, I mean, he was, brother with I'm trying to remember the name, Lupercus, I think it's Lupercus, which was kind of a rival to him, but Lupercus is slain in this mythology by a centaur. No coincidence there. Another Nephilim type concept, and he becomes the god of this world. So this idea of CERN that they've used for the name of this project, this thought that they might actually be trying to get into the abyss to let Apollyon out, or Abaddon out, and his followers, is very, very much part of prophecy. And for people who don't know, Apollo, which is the sun god, another allegory for Osiris and or all of the sun gods around the world, which is, again, as I mentioned, was a religion invented by Enoch, is also known as Apollyon, and is recorded as such on a wall over in a Greek temple, and Apollo is also known as the Greek god of death, and Apollyon is the Greek name for Abaddon, who comes out of the abyss and is the leader of these creatures coming out of the abyss.
Wow, unbelievable. So yeah, I think honestly that's what we're facing today. This exponential growth in technology that's coupling with this entity that's being created or released from that abyss, Apollyon, potentially. And
yes.
Okay.
And the artificial intelligence that comes along with this, which will be part of the image of the beast, right?
Right.
So this technology and this quantum computing is going to be a significant part to the end time, as it partners with the bloodlines and the false prophets.
Yeah. So essentially, we're living in the times of Noah again, per se.
I think so.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And again, as I mentioned in the first half, which was a nice little foreshadow to where we're ending up, is I believe that civilization had developed this 7 sacred sciences to a level that's greater than what we have today. And if we have what we have today, and we can see what's coming on the horizon, and if we take Jesus at his word that the end time will be like the days of Noah, then the antediluvian epoch has had a technology that is greater than what we have right now, because we're not in the end time yet.
Right. So, I mean, there's so much information, and it's very fascinating. And again, the intention of this conversation is not to encourage the fear, but is more or less to clarify the things that we feel is very confusing, and to open up that level of conversation that we shouldn't be fearful of asking the questions. I believe from our society today, there's always the holding back of asking a question. But when we grew up, back in those days, when we considered those days as old school type of way of being raised, asking that question, there is no dumb questions. And, when you withhold asking of certain questions, you definitely shut down open lines of energy from
it does, and it's key to ask more of the right questions,
right,
so that
right.
You understand what they're doing, because they do everything in front of our noses in plain sight, just as they've named CERN in plain sight.
Right.
We just have to understand the language that they're talking in, and if you ask the right questions and ask critical questions and keep digging below the surface, you'll understand what they're doing and what they're planning. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, right. Very straightforward, just like what we mentioned before. Just blatantly stating up front in Latin the prominence of Lucifer, within their ceremonies. That kind of blows me away. That blew me away when I first was exposed to that. But, okay, with everything said, okay, with all this wonderful knowledge, okay, as a caveat and takeaway from what we can bring to our loved ones, and even for the new listeners just jumping into this conversation, what can we take from this information, and what can we do as human beings to self-empower ourselves as a community from what is yet to come?
I would say two things. One is, first of all, is understand the language of what is being said so that you do not become deceived. Right? Because as we understand, the deceptions are going to be a great deception, an illusion, a delusion to the world that's going to deceive even the elect. So we're not going to be able to rely on many of our church leaders, right? Because they're going to be deceived. It's going to be at that level. So we have to understand how great of a deception that this is going to be and on how many fronts. The only way we can understand that is to understand what they believe and what they're trying to do, so that we can be prepared to not be fooled, because we're going to be hit with propaganda and brainwashing never seen before. And they're going to present us with false information. They're going to present us with ideas that are going to be designed to bring down Christianity and to bring the world together so that they can have a new world order and a universal religion, so that the ones with the gene of Isis and the right bloodlines are going to be able to evolve into godhood, however that's going to be presented. So that's what's coming. Then the second thing is that how can we plant seeds with other people by understanding this information, so that perhaps, even if they don't believe today, when it starts to happen, when they start to see it, they're going to remember and say, wait a minute, I'm being deceived, and maybe we can save a few more people.
But I believe through consciousness and approaching this with neutrality, approaching this with love, the connection that we have with the hearts, with Jesus, through God, the Creator. I believe by maintaining the level of love through anything that comes our way, whether it's the transhumanistic agenda, the Luciferian agenda, it doesn't even matter. We have to maintain the reason why we are powerful. And once we can be able to enlighten others through that self-empowerment and to know that we are that connection, the divine source with the Creator, I believe we can change all of this and make it into something of another reality and manifestation, through
yes.
humanity.
Well, we can't change what's going to happen because
right.
It's ordained. But what we can do is take those principles as to what you're talking about and not be deceived, because we're going to have to go back to what it says in Scripture, and we're going to have to rely on love and what's in our hearts and what we truly believe, because when we start to be segregated and classified as enemies of the state and as apocalyptic, dangerous people to the New World Order that don't deserve godhood and only deserve to be persecuted, enslaved, and slaughtered, then many people who are weak in their faith are going to say, I'm going to go along with mainstream society. I'm going to take the easy way out. Problem is what seems the easy way out is going to bring certain death, and if you take the mark, eternal torture. And so the difficult way is going to be the right way, and it's going to be so hard to make that right choice.
Right. Absolutely. I can see that coming about to be, and that'll be the test for us, especially the leaders within this knowing of things, this acknowledgement of this truth. So, Gary, thank you so much for providing this knowledge, this wisdom, with the main intention to help awaken many people who are awake as well, and along with those who are still asleep. And it's definitely a process. Thank you for being here on Quantum Mindfulness Radio.
Well, thank you, because I think that last point is they're going to destroy the idea, or try to destroy the idea, that Jesus is the Messiah, and that Jesus did not. They're going to present evidence that Jesus did not die on the cross, and that he had progeny, and his bloodlines are going to be part of the pedigree of Antichrist. So the deception is going to be huge on all fronts.
Absolutely. And there you have it, our guest for today's show, Mr. Gary Wayne, ancient mysteries expert, biblical historian and researcher, and the author of his third eye-opening book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, only on Quantum Mindfulness Radio. But thank you for tuning in.
Podcast radio on realrevolutionradio.com. Never before has inspirational podcast radio been taken to this next level of wow. Until now. Today, in the age of information, more and more people are searching for answers and in solutions in how to better approach and perceive every day-to-day concerns by tuning in to realrevolutionradio.com. Isn't it about time we take back our lives, back in consciousness, in a higher state of awareness, in the evolution of our own state of higher well-being? Yes, we can do so consciously every day by tuning in to the many groundbreaking and eye-opening podcasts only on realrevolutionradio.com. Be part of that change. Evolve. Be inspired.